Hello, we're your hosts, Sourish
and Kuan,
This is WaffleByte,
where we bring you interesting bites about technology,
business,
and things that might change the world.
You can find all our sources in the description,
and you can skip to the chapters you're most interested in.
But for now, enjoy the show. The run-up to Christmas is upon us.
And I feel like I'm being blasted with Christmas music every day now.
Do you not like that?
I think it gets a bit boring after a couple of days. And, it happens every year. Everybody plays the same Christmas songs. And I think it's a bit excessive, personally.
I guess that's the reason your Discord username is Kuankuan on our server. I went to a Christmas fair, and there I quite enjoyed spending a couple of hours just watching people spend huge amounts of money trying to win these games where physics is simply rigged against them, and I found that incredibly amusing.
I think, on the one hand, it is quite funny, but on the other hand, people do that all the time with things like gambling, for example, and even things like insurance, where it's always rigged against you, and the insurance company always makes money off you, but you still choose to get insurance. Anyways, I felt like this week was a really, really big week. We saw a couple of countries effectively collapsing, like France, like South Korea.
And the thought for this week is, are ads really that bad? First off, let's talk about wearables. The BBC released a piece titled, "Why Are Doctors Wary of Wearables?" It covers the increased popularity of wearable devices, such as smartwatches and smart rings, and the impact they are having on people. The article also investigates what some doctors have to say about them. We mentioned this a while ago, but smartwatches just really aren't that reliable or accurate, and I imagine smart rings are actually going to be much worse. Because, in fact, the BBC article claims that measuring heart rate from the middle of your finger just isn't something that doctors would like to rely on at all, which kind of makes a lot of the measurements and a lot of the data that comes out of smart rings kind of useless because they hinge on the fact that your heart rate data from your finger is accurate. This comes after the health secretary suggested that we give wearables to millions of British citizens, which I just think is a completely objectively stupid thing. I mean, it can't be objective, but I think it's as close to objective as you can get, because these wearable devices, at least the consumer ones, they just are not good, and they are not medical instruments. Now, if we want to give wearables to millions of citizens, we can, as long as they are very specific, super specialized sensors. For example, blood sugar patches that diabetic people sometimes use. And in fact, I think this industry is one that we should be paying more attention to, because there are quite a lot of advancements in the past 5 to 10 years of smart devices that you can wear to help combat specific health issues that people may have.
I think certain companies have made a big deal out of additional health features on their wearable devices. And I think for some groups of people, that can actually be incredibly useful. I'm thinking of particularly speaking older people who may struggle with health conditions more. And this group of people could probably, on aggregate, benefit from additional sensors and wearable devices which track certain attributes. But I think for the majority of people who are younger, I think this is certainly not a concern. Having said that, though, with more and more people getting obese and fat, I do think that we might see chronic health condition rising, and I do wonder if wearables can play a role in trying to combat that, or at least bringing it to people's attention earlier so that they can seek effective treatment.
Yes, wearables have brought one's health to more people's attention, which is certainly a positive thing. However, just because there are lots of positives to some people wearing wearables, that doesn't mean that on aggregate it is a positive thing. And in fact, doctors have noted a huge amount of false positives, or patients coming in because their Apple Watch said something random, whereas there's not really much of an issue for the doctor to look into. And crucially, does your Apple Watch, for example, detect cancer? And the answer is no. And I don't suspect it will anytime soon. And that just means there are all sorts of really major health issues that your smart device just will not be able to detect. And those are the issues that we really need resolving, as opposed to you feeling ill, or maybe you getting a bad night's sleep for a couple of days, or getting the flu, or something like that. Now, I think one reason that this has become such a widespread issue is because of Apple's marketing. And we notice that pretty much now in every single Apple event, especially the September ones, Apple likes to flex about how their smartwatches have been doing great things, and the Apple Watch has saved this person's life and this person's life. And they get all sorts of stories and anecdotes and turn them into really nice, fancy videos that consumers love. And they use this as advertising. And this is just not great because, I mean, yes, I'm sure all of these stories are completely accurate, but they are very selective. Imagine how many times people have used the Apple Watch for a false positive and, for example, put extra strain on the NHS. Or imagine all of the amount of times that there have been health issues that the Apple Watch has missed. And I imagine those two numbers are much higher than the amount of success the Apple Watch has had in identifying real issues.
On the one hand, I think Apple executives would be keen to point out that the Apple Watch is not a medical device. I think that whatever help it can have to certain groups of people should certainly be praised. And I think what we need to give Apple credit for is that they are legitimately working on improving their health features. And from my understanding, their health features are actually better than some of their competitors. They also, slightly related to this, improved their AirPods Pros by adding hearing aid features. And I think that is also a very good feature. So whilst we cannot say that Apple has done an incredible job at making a health device, because it's a smartwatch, I do think that the effort that they're putting in is probably greater than some of their competitors, and that should be acknowledged.
Yeah, but the problem is, people are treating this as a health device, and Apple themselves absolutely know it, and they're not really doing anything to stop people from thinking that. It's kind of Apple just sitting on the side and enjoying selling all of these devices, watching people use them and treat them as a medical device, which it simply isn't. Now, the trend that we've been seeing in the tech industry as a whole for the past 50, 60 years is the idea of miniaturization, right? When we make things smaller, everything becomes better. If you can make a transistor smaller, we fit more of them on a chip. If you can fit more of them on a chip, we have more powerful chips. And it's a similar idea with computers. Computers used to take up a whole room. Now they can take up a small space in your pocket. And in fact, smartwatches were the next step in that way. They can take up a small patch on your wrist. And now the next generation is almost going to be smart rings. And I mean, it's great that we can miniaturize decent health tracking tech and batteries and compute into this really, really, really small and compact and lightweight device. But if the data we're getting out of this device just isn't that good, then this device isn't that useful. But I don't really understand the trend of smart rings. Do you, Kuankuan?
I think that some people like the fact that smart rings are, generally speaking, less intrusive relative to a watch. They also tend to have better battery life, which can be very appealing because smartwatches, you tend to have to charge them every day. But I think for me, we're really starting to see people want to have more of their own health data. And I'm a bit skeptical about that, because if I had a bad night's sleep, I don't need anybody to tell me that. I know that I've slept poorly, right? And similarly speaking, you can probably gauge around how many hours you're sleeping every night. So my issue is, you're not really seeing these devices help you improve the sleep. It's not like you can change your sleeping technique to sleep better, generally speaking. So from that perspective, I'm a bit skeptical of these smart rings and smartwatches. But I do see the appeal. It is certainly quite nifty to see your data. And for certain groups of people, albeit a very small group like elite athletes, this is legitimately useful. But for the vast majority of us, I don't see the need for this, certainly, especially if you don't have a particular health condition.
I disagree. I think if you're an elite athlete, you want real data, and real data does not come from a consumer device. I think pretty much no one actually benefits from this device in a tangible way, other than the psychological fact that they may now pay more attention to their health. For the second story, we'll talk about some new XREAL glasses. XREAL unveiled their next generation of AR glasses, the XREAL One and One Pro. They bring higher end features into the base model, but with price hikes to match. The XREAL One, for example, costs £450, while the One Pro is an additional £100. Now, the tech in here is actually amazing, right? The Pro variant has a pretty huge field of view of 57 degrees, which is the highest that we've seen from AR glasses so far. And the rate of development of these AR glasses from the company XREAL is phenomenal. In fact, I remember just a couple years ago, I was strongly considering purchasing the AR glasses that they had at the time. And, well, compared to today, those ones are just kind of trash. In particular, what people are excited about with the new XREAL One Series is that they have their own custom chip. So XREAL have designed their own custom chip, which they call the X1 chip. And what this chip allows you to do is effectively plug in your glasses to any device, and your glasses will kind of manage like how to display stuff. And that may sound trivial, but if you look back to last generation or the previous generation before that of the XREAL glasses, you'd have to either have custom software on your computer or your phone, and not every phone supported this software. And you may also need to have a specific hardware device in your pocket, like a whole extra device, just to process the display output from your phone or your computer and turn it into something that your glasses can actually use. One of the reasons that this was so complicated is because if you imagine you're wearing these AR glasses and you want to fix a monitor or a screen in the air in front of your eyes so that as you look around, the monitor doesn't move with you, the monitor is stationary in space. Well, that requires a lot of additional processing, and to achieve those 3 degrees of freedom was not easy. However, with these new glasses, you don't need any additional device, and you don't need any additional software. And this is huge. Like, this was the one reason I didn't buy these glasses 2 years ago. It's because my phone and my computer and all of that did not support the software. And if I wanted to buy the extra processing brick that you'd otherwise need, that cost a lot of extra money. So I think this marks a huge step towards the future of AR glasses. Now, XREAL are a huge fan of calling these AR or augmented reality glasses. But I don't think this is actually augmented reality, because whilst the glasses do allow you to see into the real world and they place a screen in front of the real world, you don't interact with the real world at all. Right? Like the glasses, they don't have any external sensors such as a camera or LiDAR. So you're really just placing a screen in front of your eyes with the ability to see stuff around you, or if you choose not to, you can black them out. So I don't think this is AR. But Kuankuan, do you think they're using the term AR for marketing, or do you think that their vision actually lies in true AR glasses, and this is just yet another one of their products, which is just one step closer to their end goal, almost like what Meta are doing with their Orion glasses?
I think for me, the terminology almost doesn't matter, in the sense that we're seeing companies which make VR headsets, they're trying to make them lighter and more portable, and people who are trying to make originally smart glasses are trying to make them more powerful, right, and more feature rich. So I think almost we're seeing people converge into this final state, where I do believe has the greatest potential. But for me, there are a couple of issues with current implementations of these glasses. One of which being battery life, because as somebody who wears glasses, it's simply not an option for me to take my glasses off and charge them if I want to see. But also, I think that they should reconsider what markets they focus on, because I don't really see that such devices being particularly practical in a office setting or in a business setting, right? Because if you're at your desk, you likely have monitors in front of you. You're going to need a laptop, right? You're not going to be able to work off your glasses, at least in the near future. So I don't see the additional value of having a pair of these glasses. Whereas I do see, as we said a couple of episodes ago, if you were, say, biking, if you could have navigation on your glasses, that would be immensely helpful. And likewise, if you were to record moments with family, with friends, say at an event, at a birthday, that could also be very useful. But overall, I'm really not fussed about if it's actually AR. I think we should evaluate it based on their features, and currently we still have quite a long way to go in order for it to be mainstream.
The biggest benefit with these glasses today is the fact that you just get a big screen anywhere you go. And the two use cases I see of people using these, the first one is in a workstation environment where they can have a whole host of monitors in front of them. So right now, for example, I have a 27-inch single monitor, but if I want a really big ultra-wide monitor and maybe another couple monitors in my vision, then I can do that with these glasses. And this is particularly useful if, for example, you fly a lot and you need to work on planes, where you can't just whip out a 27-inch monitor. Now, the second use case people have is gaming, and I've seen quite a lot of people actually plug this into their Steam Deck, and now all of a sudden they have a way more immersive gaming experience on the go. But of course, these two use cases are certainly not mainstream, and you pointed out the battery life, and I think that is going to be the biggest issue moving forwards. We have consistently seen in the past few years the miniaturization of things like compute, cameras, displays, and all of that stuff. All of that is advancing at a pretty fast rate, and we're seeing scientific developments every few months. However, with batteries, yes, they are developing over time, and in fact, just in the past couple of months, we have seen some pretty major developments with Chinese smartphones having battery capacities exceeding 6,000 milliamp hours within the same thickness. However, when it comes to glasses, you have such a small amount of space to work with that we really do need some radical new solution. We don't just need to advance current technology. We need to invent something new. We need to discover something new for glasses to actually hold a meaningful battery. And in that respect, I very much do agree with you, in the sense that we are extremely far away from AR glasses becoming the compute device. For the final topic, let's talk about a bird drone. Researchers from Switzerland and Scotland have developed an alternative to your standard quadcopter drone. Their new robot has legs, allowing it to walk around and jump over obstacles. In fact, it can even jump to launch itself into flight. Standard drones tend to have 4 motors, one for each propeller. This is incredibly energy inefficient, whereas this new robot, dubbed Raven, uses a single motor. So for less energy, it can achieve a lot more as it can navigate terrain and jump over obstacles. And as the hardware progresses, we're seeing an increased amount of biomimicry in robotics. You know, if you look back to maybe 5 or 6 years ago when the Boston Dynamics Spot robot was released, to what we're seeing today, there's a huge trend towards trying to copy what nature does, because nature has evolved to be as efficient as possible. And the only thing limiting us from copying them is our hardware. Now, specifically with the Raven robot, the new part is the incredibly complex leg structure, which allows it to actually walk around. So I'm not just saying this can waddle around and maybe, walk on flat surfaces. It can actually navigate tough terrain.
I've just searched up this Raven robot because I hadn't previously seen it, and it looks very complex, I must say. The amount of moving parts is quite substantial. And I do agree with you in that we should often consider nature more in our scientific designs, because that is where we get some of our most profound and biggest scientific advancements. But in this case, drone technology has advanced so much, largely in part actually due to DJI, this one company, that you would have to have serious not only capital but also research and development to better the quadcopter design that we see. Because for all the flaws that you mentioned of current drone designs, there are also a number of benefits that I think people may overlook, and there will be a lot of challenges, especially in practical use cases, as opposed to demonstrations of these more nature-inspired designs.
And just to clarify, this robot really does look like a bird. So it doesn't have propellers, it has wings. Drones have been this really cool thing for as long as I can remember, at least, so maybe 10 years. And there's always been lots of hype around drones. And whenever DJI releases a new drone, there's, again, plenty of hype. But are drones actually useful? Is this brand new Raven drone useful? What have we seen drones being used for thus far? Because from my perspective, it seems that drones only really have two use cases. The first one is for image or video capabilities, for example, to scout out an area or to get really pretty shots for your cinematic YouTube video. And the second use case is warfare, and that is certainly not a use case that I consider productive for drones.
Well, on to your latter point, Sourish, I'm not sure you have much of a say in how drones are used, because if we look at the battlefields in Ukraine and Russia, drones are playing a huge role in it, and drone technology has advanced so much since the beginning of the war. I know Russia has been launching precision strikes on moving Ukrainian targets, which is a very scary thought, actually. But I do think that, given the fact that you now do not have humans in a vulnerable position, that is an area where drone technology is being seen as having a lot of potential. Now,
I mean, humans are still dying, and like this does not really, like, drones have not really changed the battlefield that much, in the sense that it's not the drones that push the front line forwards or backwards, right? Drones just kind of prolong war. And so I'm not actually sure if drones prevent death that much, at least these type of quadcopter drones. Obviously, if you refer to drones as in the mini missile drones, then that's a different story. But, you know, that's not the type of drone we're talking about today.
what's also interesting, though, is, as you mentioned, there are many types of drones, and there are drones which contain huge payloads. But increasingly, we're seeing that these civilian drones, these quadcopters, they can actually be modified to be pretty nasty weapons. And if you think about a camera, if you replace the camera with some explosives, you know, all of a sudden you could be doing a good amount of damage to, say, a car or something like that. I think that's a very interesting topic. I do agree that obviously it's not nice and war is not nice. But yeah, apart from that, you really don't see drones being used very much, apart from the two use cases you mentioned. So I do wonder what the innovation in the drone space can bring us in terms of capability, because for a long time we've been saying, oh, drones are going to deliver your Amazon parcels, but it does seem that that hasn't happened yet, and probably won't happen because our current logistics systems are so advanced that it is still more cost effective to just use vans and drivers.
I guess I have 2 points here. The first is that, you know, at face value, drones seem like an amazing thing, like this really cool thing that can just fly anywhere and carry payloads and whatever, and be autonomous these days. But when it comes to the nitty gritty, I don't think we have really considered the usefulness of drones. And secondly, when it comes to, for example, delivering your Amazon packages, a key issue with that is coming back to the idea of battery life, right? If you want to use a drone to carry a parcel that weighs, for example, 1 or 2 kilograms, then you need a pretty beefy drone with a pretty beefy battery life, especially if you're in the more rural areas. And it's not like you can use drones to deliver packages within cities, right? That's just not going to happen, especially with all of these tall buildings you may have to navigate, all of the extra wind effects that are caused by buildings, and of course the fact that you tend to get airports in cities. So I don't really think drone delivery will occur anytime soon.
I do think so. We've seen some really cool applications of drones, such as in Africa, they're using drones to deliver blood, and they have been, and it seems to be very successful, and that's certainly a positive. I do agree that in big cities, there are some challenges related to, obviously, airspace restrictions and tall buildings, but perhaps in rural areas, if there are, say, only one Amazon package in a large area, instead of driving a whole van there, you could fly a drone there, pop down the package, and pop back. Because in places where, you know, there isn't a high population density, drones may be more cost effective than a van, compared to in cities where vans still might be superior.
You know what's a really interesting concept to think about? Right, so in the West, most of our cities are designed car first, and therefore everything we do kind of has to be done on a vehicle, such as delivery. However, as you said, we're seeing in Rwanda that drones are being used, and these places don't necessarily have the most established cities. So maybe places like that will be built from the ground up with the idea of delivering parcels via drones. And that would just be so cool. Like, imagine if we build a city with like forward-thinking technology in mind, just like we did 200 years ago when we built cities for cars.
Over 20 years ago, on a bright sunny day in New York, the world changed forever. 4 planes that took off that morning were never to come back. A day of unimaginable tragedy, heroism, and consequences that continue to shape our lives today. This is the September 11th attacks.
United 93, you're here, Cleveland Center.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way. What came down? What came down?
We crashed. The other trade center's down. It's down.
Very sketchy details reaching us here at Sky Centre. Important enough to bring to you, though, at this
Getting
early
reports
stage.
in now that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
There have been a series of terrorist attacks in the United
We can now
States.
confirm a second plane has crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
To understand the tragic events of 9/11, we must look at the complex history that preceded it. The roots of the attacks trace back to the US involvement in the Middle East during the late 20th century. During the Cold War, the United States sought influence in the Middle East to counter Soviet expansion and protect vital oil interests. In particular, the US and allies were involved in the Soviet-Afghan War in 1988, supporting a group of Islamic fighters. Further US involvement with Israel and in the Gulf War caused further distaste towards the US by some Middle Eastern countries. A small minority took it to the extreme. Osama bin Laden viewed these policies as an occupation of sacred lands and vowed to get revenge on the United States. Formed in 1988, Al-Qaeda emerged from the chaos of the Soviet-Afghan War. Initially, its focus was on fighting perceived enemy of Islam. Over time, its leaders shifted their sights to the United States. Al-Qaeda would take it to the extreme. Terrorist measures to show the world its hatred for the United States. In 1993, a truck bomb detonated in the parking garage of the World Trade Center, killing 6 and injuring over 1,000. The attack was a warning of what was to come. Subsequent attacks included the 1998 US Embassy bombings in East Africa and the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole. Despite mounting evidence of Al-Qaeda's capabilities, the full scale of its ambition remained underestimated. By the late 1990s, Osama bin Laden and his lieutenants had devised the most ambitious plan yet, an attack designed not just to kill, but to strike at the very heart of America's economic, military, and political power. In early 2000, Muhammad Atta, the ringleader, and 3 other members who had studied in Germany of what became known as the Hamburg Cell, began intensive preparation for the attack. They traveled to Afghanistan to finalize plans with bin Laden himself. In June 2000, Muhammad Atta and Moan al-Shahi arrived in Newark, New Jersey on tourist visas. From there, they traveled to Florida, where they would enroll in flight schools to learn how to pilot large commercial aircraft. The other hijackers would arrive from April 2001 and begin flight training and final preparations. On the morning of September the 11th, Atta arrived at Portland Airport at 5:40 a.m. and boarded a flight to Boston Logan International Airport. At Boston, he was selected for secondary screening for explosive, but was able to board American Airlines Flight 11 to Los Angeles. At 7:59 a.m., Flight 11 took off from Boston with 92 passengers and crew. Just 15 minutes later, the hijackers reportedly stabbed the pilot to death, and Muhammad Atta, the ringleader, took control of the cockpit. Air traffic control lost contact with the aircraft, and it had quietly changed course towards New York. The hijackers, in an error in operating the aircraft, accidentally broadcasted a passenger announcement to air traffic control.
We have some planes, just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're turning to the airport.
15 Southwest of Bono going to Hampton. And who's trying to call me here? American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
Some flight attendants attempted to make calls to inform the world about the situation. Betty Ong, a flight attendant on Flight 11, stayed on the phone for over 20 minutes to provide crucial updates of the hijacking.
Our number 1 has been staffed and our 5 has been staffed. Can anybody get up to the cockpit? Can anybody get up to the cockpit? We can't even get into the cockpit. We don't know who's up there.
At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, impacting between the 93rd and 99th floors. Hundreds died instantly. Anyone above the impact zone was trapped and no one survived. Initially, it was unclear what happened. Many believed it was an accident and it was a light aircraft that crashed into the North Tower. Evacuation began immediately, and fortunately, most people below the impact zone made it out alive. Meanwhile, in the South Tower, some panicked people began evacuating. Despite this, though, the Port Authority, responsible for the building, ordered people to return to their desks as it was not apparent that the North Tower posed any danger to the South Tower. Just 17 minutes after the first impact, United Airlines Flight 175, another Boeing 767 bound for Los Angeles, hit the South Tower. Millions watched in horror as it was broadcasted on live TV.
From the front angle before, but not from this angle.
At 8:50 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, leaving Washington Dulles Airport, was seized by 5 hijackers. The hijackers turned it around and crashed it into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. Final plane, United Airlines Flight 93, departed from Newark at 8:42 a.m. It too was hijacked by 9:28 a.m. On United Flight 93, passengers learnt about the attacks via phone calls to loved ones. Knowing their plane was part of the plot, they made a heroic decision to fight back. In an extraordinary act of courage, they stormed the cockpit, forcing the hijackers to crash the plane into a field in Pennsylvania rather than its intended target, believed to be either the US Capitol or the White House. At 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 went down near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In New York, the South Tower collapsed first, followed shortly by the North Tower. Many trapped above the impact zone were unable to escape. Many died of smoke inhalation, others when the towers collapsed, and some died from jumping from the towers. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people and injured thousands more, but their impact went far beyond the immediate tragedy. First responders faced unimaginable dangers, risking their lives to save others. Over 300 firefighters died that day. Toxic dust and debris in the aftermath would lead to long-term health issues for many, with thousands dying in the following years from cancers and other related diseases. Thousands of families were forever changed by the loss of loved ones, community across the globe mourned, and the world entered a new era of heightened security and vigilance. September the 11th, 2001 was not just a moment in history, it was a turning point. It reshaped the world's understanding of terrorism, security, and resilience. The following decade would see the US engage in a war on terror, leading to many more deaths and injuries in its involvement in the Middle East. On May the 2nd, 2011, the United States succeeded in a special operation to kill Osama bin Laden, marking what is perceived by many as justice to those who fell on September the 11th.
Stab a chest, swear to God you're a narcissist. Never again.
The thought from the beginning of the episode was, are ads really that bad? In the earlier days of Facebook's products, the company reported that ads generally increased engagement on their platform. So, consumers seem to like ads. And of course, big tech absolutely loves ads. So, are ads really that bad? Because to me, it seems like a bit of a win-win.
I think you need to evaluate ads considering the other options, right? Because you can't have things for free, unfortunately. So if you want digital services, there has to be a cost, and that cost can come as a payment, which increasingly is where journalism gets their money from, as opposed to ads. They get their money through subscriptions. Or it can be through ads, which is still what Google does, what Meta does, and all of the social media that people gladly scroll for hours upon hours every day. And so if you consider that, I think most people would rather have ads than having to pay to use Instagram, for example. And broadly speaking, I agree, even though I think that it would be better if we all had to pay for the things we actually really valued. But I think that's such an impractical situation that it's never going to happen.
A survey discovered that 80% of consumers would rather get more ads if it meant that they can keep using online services for free. But are the ads themselves actually that bad? Like for me, I watch a lot of YouTube, and I end up actually watching more sponsorship segments than I end up not watching, just because I find them somewhat informative and interesting.
For me, it's the opposite. I watch no sponsor segments. Partly that's because sponsors tend to sponsor a variety of channels, and so I might see a particular VPN ad for the 50th time in a week, which simply does not need to happen. But also because if you consider why companies spend money marketing, it tends to be things that are fairly easy to make. So the barrier of entry is low, and therefore you need marketing to sell your product, because you might have 10 different products that are all basically the same. And to me, that's not very interesting at all. I do think that advertisements can be quite creative, but also I'm not a particular fan of them, so I try to not watch them if I don't have to.
I actually think ads just aren't that bad because they can be very useful. They can expose you to more products or services that you might be interested in. And as long as you are always conscious of the fact that it is an ad or a sponsored segment, then I think you can actually get value from ads. However, when ads begin to take up a lot of your content time, that's an issue. For example, Spotify recently claimed that on average, 11% of a podcast episode is now ads. Now, listeners of this channel would be pleased to know that WaffleByte is 0% ads. However, that is not true for every single podcast, and I can imagine it can get quite annoying to have ads splattered throughout your podcast.
As somebody who listens to a lot of podcasts, I very much agree. And that's also because if you consider when you're listening to a podcast, right, it's usually if you're, say, cooking or you're stuck in a metal tube 100 meters under the ground. And in these situations, you tend not to be able to skip the ads, right? If I'm watching a YouTube video and there's a sponsor segment, I can skip it. But in a podcast, it's much more difficult to skip, and it becomes infuriating because I have to endure it, and it's often very uninsightful. But I do think that a lot of people actually follow through with the ads, right? In order for the ad economy to function, it has to be effective to advertisers, and it is, broadly speaking, because people are very much willing to buy stuff they see on ads. And these companies like Google and Meta are so good now at targeting advertisements that it is sort of a win-win situation, even though if we take a consumer standpoint, it would probably be better if they weren't served as many ads, because it would probably mean that their purchases are a bit more sensible.
Do people really follow through with ads? I suspect that increasingly, companies are realizing that their brand image matters more. And whilst it may be difficult to come up with a very direct quantifiable benefit to spending money on advertising, for example, historically you used to be able to say, okay, for every dollar I spend on Facebook ads, I get $1.50 back. You may not be able to make such a direct comparison when it comes to, for example, YouTube sponsorships or other internet ads, because it's the brand name, the experience, and the popularity that you are aiming to gain through ads as opposed to direct sales. Anyway, enough people find ads annoying enough, such that 31.5% of users use ad blockers at least sometimes. And that data is from 2023. Now, interestingly, I suspect a trigger for people to install ad blockers is once they see a fraudulent ad or a pornographic ad, because 22% of all digital advertising is fraud. And it's actually quite a popular medium for hackers to target people. Perhaps the biggest thing that people have to say against internet advertising is the privacy issues and the amount of data that is harvested from users. However, I actually think this isn't actually that big of an issue. And even though we've mentioned it a few times on the podcast as being an issue, I think maybe it's slightly overblown in public perception. Because the biggest companies like Facebook and Google are people who control effectively 100% of online internet ads. These companies collect a ton of data, and that is correct. They collect a ton of data on you, but they don't actually sell your data, right? It's like their data is what makes them so valuable. They're not going to just sell it away, right? That's their treasure trove of information. What they do sell is they sell advertising, and then the company, Google or Facebook or Meta, they use the data that they have to make your advertising better, but they never actually give you any data. And one of the issues with data collection is if, for example, there's a breach and hackers manage to gain access to your data and publish it online. But we rarely see breaches with the biggest companies like Meta and Google, because they tend to have really rigorous security protocols that, for example, smaller companies or growing startup companies don't follow. So the people that control the ad networks, Meta and Google, the people that collect all of this data and harvest your data across multiple sites and apps that you use every single day, your data, for the most part, is kind of safe with them. Now, obviously, from a moral perspective and an ethical standpoint, my argument kind of fails. But from a practical standpoint, for the average consumer, like, this is the only thing that matters, the fact that your data isn't publicly available and isn't sold. And frankly, it isn't when you're using ad networks such as Facebook or Meta and Google.
I think the key issue is that data privacy is, of course, very important, but when we discuss it, it is often lumped together, right? So if you have personal data like username and passwords, and perhaps addresses and emails and things like that, that is much more important than Google knowing that I prefer dark chocolate over milk chocolate, for example. And that is potentially used for targeting advertising. And a lot of similar things are used as well, right? And it's not necessarily your personal information, it is your preferences, because that's what determines what is an effective ad and what isn't. But I think that when we have cybersecurity incidents, often it is personal data that is leaked. And by extension, people often blame targeted advertising and advertisers who collect all of your data. But potentially, that is actually not the problem, right? We can all agree that personal data being leaked is bad, but actually, the data that is used to power targeted advertising may not be particularly harmful if it's leaked, and it can actually just contribute towards a more tailored browsing experience. So I think we need to partially disassociate this, because while cybersecurity is important in all situations, it is more important in situations where personal data is at risk, and it becomes unacceptable when leaks happen over there. But when it comes to advertising, as you said, with the biggest advertising companies, this really isn't a huge issue, and we should be a bit more reassured that we aren't going to be compromised by these big advertisers.
If I look at the main cybersecurity concerns that I have for my life, well, historically, it's actually been having things like my email and my physical address shared online, because that would result in a whole load of spam. However, as AI gets much better at identifying the spam and filtering this out from my inbox, that is not my concern anymore. And so my pretty much one and only concern is having passwords and usernames leaked, and perhaps messages, for example, but mainly passwords and usernames. And that is simply not data that is collected by ad networks. And a lot of the time that is kind of down to poor end user consumer security technique. So coming back to the question, are ads really that bad? Well, I think we can split this up into two things. Are ad networks bad and are ads bad? So when I talk about ad networks, I'm talking about Facebook's ad thing and also Google AdSense, which, you know, they comprise pretty much every single ad you're going to see online. And I do not think ad networks are that bad. And given that they allow us to access such amazing services for free, I'm going to say ad networks are fantastic. Now, are ads themselves bad? Well, when they begin to occupy so much of your content, then yes, and that is particularly relevant on websites such as blogs and news articles, where it can be distracting with the amount of ads that are there, and a lot of the ads can indeed be adult content or fraudulent.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back next Monday with a new episode.
And check out the description to sign up to our weekly newsletter. You can also reach out to us on X at the WaffleByte. See you there.